You light our homes. Keep us warm.
You help us explore, innovate, and achieve the unthinkable.
You are everywhere.
Yet, sometimes out of reach.
You move us forward and bring us together.
And together, we're on a journey towards the future of energy.
So what will it look like?
It's hard to say, but we know it will be sustainable and abundant.
We're already on our way.
With a common purpose, each of us playing our part.
At Deloitte, we're connecting every bright mind, every organization, every startup, every innovator.
Every citizen, CEO, and regulator.
Making this future happen won't be easy, so we're developing practical solutions.
And a clear roadmap to help our clients on their way.
We'll keep making those connections.
Each step well planned, moving forward together.
To make our new energy future a reality. Let's connect for a new energy future.
Good morning. I apologize for being late. Welcome to the panel dealing with green hydrogen and REPowerEU. You've heard quite a bit today why this plan has been created. We want to become as quickly as possible independent from fossil fuels from Russia. We do it to protect Ukraine and also to protect our own economy from manipulation and destabilization by our former biggest supply of gas. And not only gas, we are doing this by diversification of supplies, by decreasing energy consumption, as well as by development of renewables, including renewable gas and green hydrogen. And this is our general plan. However, in this panel, I'd like us to take a look at more detailed challenges so that we can understand a bit more carefully what this challenge is all about in practice, so that we can get an idea of how we are going to carry out this challenge in practice. Together here is my colleague from Brussels. This part of the conversation will take place in English, so if you need to, please make use of the interpretation sets. My guests have already been presented. My name is Izabela Zygmunt. I represent the Office of the European Commission in Warsaw. And at this point, I'd like to move to questions. And the first question is, the first question goes to Alessandro, who is an expert in energy in the European Commission.
To you, we heard about the general objective of the REPowerEU plan, but could you help us understand what this challenge actually involves? How can green hydrogen actually replace Russian gas in the EU economy? What solutions, what technologies, what uses, and what is the scale of the challenge?
Thank you, Izabela, and good morning, colleagues. First of all, apologies for not being there. I would like to be there, but unfortunately this was not possible. But thanks anyway for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak here at this conference. So you know that the European Commission has always been quite ambitious on hydrogen. This was already set in our hydrogen strategy that we published in July 2020, and also in the proposals that translated this strategy into actual legislation with the Fit for 55 proposal, which includes several provisions concerning hydrogen. Now, the Russian invasion of Ukraine gave hydrogen even a more prominent role, and this is reflected in our REPowerEU plan adopted in May this year. The reason why it gave a more prominent role is that the upscale of renewable hydrogen and these derivatives like ammonia and other derivatives would accelerate our decarbonization and also greatly reduce the use dependence on Russian fossil fuels, therefore strengthening our energy security. This is why we propose in the REPowerEU to have 10 million tons of own production in the EU and 10 million tons of imported renewable hydrogen. Based on our scenario, these 20 million tons of hydrogen will allow us to replace 27 billion cubic meters of imported Russian natural gas, 4.7 billion cubic meters of imported Russian oil, and coking coal imports for an amount of 156 kilotons. Now, very often what happens is that the focus on hydrogen is put on supply and lower attention is dedicated to demand. On the contrary, we need to make sure the supply and demand match and are equally ambitious to ensure a smooth development of renewable hydrogen market. This is what we are trying to do in our actions, in our legislative and policy actions. Another thing to take into account when looking at how to match demand and supply is that renewable hydrogen will be, at least in this decade, a very valuable commodity and relatively scarce one if we compare it to its decarbonization potential, to our decarbonization needs, and to the renewable electricity that we need in order to produce renewable hydrogen. This is why we believe that hydrogen provides the highest benefit whenever it is used in sectors in which its greenhouse gas reduction potential is higher. Starting, for example, from the current uses of hydrogen, which are the first one that we need to decarbonize. This is why we targeted in our proposals hard to decarbonize sectors like industry and transport. We had already proposed very high target in our initial proposal for a revision of the Renewable Energy Directive, but the invasion of Ukraine by Russia made clear that we need to move faster. And this is why we increase our targets. And now we propose to have 75% of renewable hydrogen in the total hydrogen consumption in industry by 2030. And this includes both energy and non-energy uses of hydrogen, like, for example, hydrogen used as a feedstock for the production of chemical or for the production of steel. And 5% of hydrogen or its derivatives to be used in transport. So 5% of all fuel consumed in transport should be covered by renewable hydrogen and its derivatives. In our view, these targets will create the incentives to boost renewable hydrogen demand and introduce also a market premium that will make renewable hydrogen more competitive compared to fossil-based hydrogen. And if you look at the remarkable pipeline of projects that we see from the European industry, we believe that this approach is working, and investments are taking place, are starting to be planned. And above all, they go into the right direction to the sectors that we need to decarbonize. Now, looking more specifically at the sectors, I already mentioned the industry and the current uses, more specifically the industry and transport. We can already see that in our modeling, at least 3.2 million tons of hydrogen by 2030 would probably be used for ammonia production. Another big part, around 2.3 million tons, will be dedicated to refining, although this will be declining as soon as we reduce our consumption of oil. So we phase out fossil oil consumption. And other potential and promising sectors in the industry, as for example steel production, and partly also the use of hydrogen for high temperature heating in industry. So these are the areas where we see a major role for hydrogen. To do this and to achieve this penetration of hydrogen in our energy consumption, we need huge investments. 113 billion euros will be needed to achieve the REPowerEU ambition, and this is on top of the investments that we already had planned within the Fit for 55. And there are plenty of financing instruments that the European Union is putting in place. First of all, the Next Generation EU, the so-called Recovery Fund, in which 9.2 billion euros were dedicated to support of national investments in hydrogen. Recently, the Commission has approved two IPCEI, two important projects of common European interest for hydrogen, for a total amount of 10.6 billion euros of state investments, which will generate more than the same amount of private investment. We have additional fund in Horizon Europe and in the Innovation Fund. And in addition to this, we established the Clean Hydrogen Partnership and the Connecting Europe Facility, which is the instrument supporting the infrastructure development in Europe, will also support targeted infrastructure investments on hydrogen. As I mentioned before, we need to focus not only on supply, but also on demand to make sure that the hydrogen ecosystem moves from niche to scale. And this is why also recently the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in her State of the European Union, announced the creation of the new European Hydrogen Bank. And this bank will be able to invest 3 billion euros toward building the future market for hydrogen. And also there, as in all our policies, we aim to focus on the main uses of hydrogen, on those that are most promising that I mentioned before.
Now,
my next question, I'd like to direct it to Director Byliński from the Ministry of Climate and Environment. We've heard today a lot about the plans of the EU, about the European vision. Please tell us what the Polish plans look like here. We have hydrogen strategy, we have REPowerEU plans. Now in context of REPowerEU, are the plans going to be modified when it comes to Poland? Thank you. As far as our Polish approach to hydrogen, and as Minister already has mentioned, we have prepared Polish hydrogen strategy, which has pointed to goals of various sectors connected with the use of hydrogen. We also think that in reality, of course, we want to use the hydrogen energy sector There is technology Power-to-X will allow us to use renewables, use of hydrogen in transport, because that will lower the emission of the sector. But the main goal of using hydrogen economy are these high energy consumption in industries. Well, for example, there where we use natural gas today, or in those applications where we have high emissions. And this is going to be the main challenge for years to come. And in line with our strategic goals connected with hydrogen development and energy and heating and industry, there are concrete steps taken, concrete investments as part of the projects being reported to receive public aid as part of Common European Interest Project. In the August of this year, Peak and Orlen Hydrogen Eagle project was listed, which concentrates on creation of on use of hydrogen for renewable sources, and then applying this hydrogen in various sectors of the economy. We had a positive decision here. We'll have other large investment projects to follow, which will be connected with the building of hydrogen economy. From the National Recovery Plan, we plan to spend 100 million euro on support of hydrogen projects, probably from Phoenix funds like that will provide continual support to hydrogen projects together with the National Environmental Protection Plan. We work on the plan which will take into account three components connected with the development of hydrogen economy. One component is the investment component. The second component, support of European interest, common European interest projects, and the third component, R&D projects, mostly in transport sector. So on one hand, we can get the goals we've assigned for ourselves, and on the other, we can also support all other projects which call for use of hydrogen economy. And there are a lot of projects like that. As far as the REPowerEU itself, it's a certain strategy, certain vision of the European Commission connected with speeding up energy transformation. And of course, as part of these steps, we have to adapt on national level, national plans. Very often there is a discussion between us, other states, and the European Commission whether we should support renewable hydrogen and also other hydrogen coming from low emission sources, because in Poland we have also projects connected with hydrogen being produced from fossil fuels or synthetic fuels, and it seems that such projects should also be taken into account. However, our goals, our actions are in line, they're concurrent. There are many projects which we plan to support in years to come. Thank you very much. At this point, I'd like us to take a look at this task through the prism of an enterprise which is already carrying a certain pilot project. Joanna Wis-Bielewicz represents Offshore Polska. Here a question regarding the strategy of your company. It's an energy company. How do you see the role of green hydrogen in a long-term strategy of the development of the company? Good afternoon, Isa. Thank you very much for this question. I was thinking about how to tell the story of our company, of Ørsted, that is the third energy company in the world, which carried out low emission transmission, which moved away from fossil fuels and became a global leader of offshore, of marine offshore. And this is this is of key importance to the way we see green hydrogen today, because we can see right away a huge resemblance to what offshore energy was 30 years ago, when back then Ørsted, or back then Danish oil and gas, when the first offshore wind farm was built. Now, a few thoughts about hydrogen in Europe. As you've mentioned here, from the report of the Commission, it stems that 96% of hydrogen is being produced from natural gas, mostly for production of fertilizers or or plastics. And we are aware that hydrogen can have a much wider application in our economy, and green hydrogen can be of key importance and is of key importance for global transformation. It turned out recently that it's a fuel that is of key importance for our energy security in Europe. There is a report that Ørsted published in the beginning of the year. In view of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it stems that 2/3 of the import of gas from Russia can be replaced by energy coming from offshore energy and power to X fuels connected with thanks to green hydrogen until 2035. We've already been conducting a number of projects which are aimed at development of this technology. Its commercialization is very important. Madam Director Marshal has already said that today we don't really have yet solutions or a business model which would allow for commercialization of scalability of this technology. In our view, this is of key importance. And we believe that this can happen until 2030. We believe that such technologies, such solutions will be there. And we are very ambitious here. We think that our company is going to be the one who will provide such business solutions, who will implement such solutions. And our trip started with a declaration that will be neutral, climate neutral, by 2025. As part of the range 1 and 2, our operational activity, till 2040 as far as the entire value chain. In analyzing our emissions, we've understood that climate neutrality of the value chain is very challenging today because key emissions in our value chain come from sectors where we still don't have low emission technologies, for example, logistics, including marine transport, or industry, including steel production, which is 50% of emissions in Ørsted value chain. However, understanding that what happened with offshore energy, that is coming from the construction of the world first offshore wind farm 91 until building the biggest offshore farm in the world not so long ago, that is from 5 megawatts to over 1 gigawatt projects, which are being completely commercial. That is, we had a huge development of technology which now can compete on global market with success, and which is taking into account was one of the most important energy sources we have at our disposal. So we understand here that commercialization of green hydrogen is also a huge business chance. Now, for that to happen, we need initiatives that Madam Director and others have mentioned, and we know it was of key importance for the development of offshore energy, that is cooperation between various sectors.
Financial support within the programs and projects for innovation. Initially, that was done in a non-commercial dimension, but also in a broader perspective, which we know proved to be a very efficient tool, where, for example, financial tools such as contracts for differences. And certainly the bank's initiatives are important here and constitute an important element. So again, access to financing for the development of technology that has not been proven to be commercially justified yet. Where we see our role in prospecting for and creating business models, well, this is something I will tell you about when I have another chance to speak. Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask Mr. Stanisław Szultka to tell us about how the Pomeranian region which we know to be one of the leading ones in terms of the development of RES, is this area of Poland through which energy will come to us through the planned or currently constructed offshore wind farms. So what makes the Pomeranian region to be predestined to become the leader of the green hydrogen? Well, we've heard that this is a technology that is only beginning to develop, and we are only searching for this moment in which this technology will become, let's say, commercially self-standing. That is why I would like to ask you what the Pomeranian region has been doing so far in order not so much to get ready for this revolution, but to be pushing it forward. Thank you very much. Thank you for this question. I need to admit that there is a certain dissonance I feel here between calling the Pomeranian region a leader, which of course I partially subscribe to, but in the context of what we've heard from the previous speaker, namely that the Polish offshore wind farms 30 years ago, investment started in this area, and now we are talking about opening offshore wind farms on the Baltic in a few years to come. That shows you the distance, right? And that shows you the place where we are. But let me start first by saying that we in the Pomeranian region, first of all, bet on green energy. We want to make the most of green energies. That is why we make them our priority, and that is why we got involved as much as possible into the development and promotion of offshore wind. Let me explain why we've been doing that. Our motivation is, and it won't come as a surprise, is that access to energy and its color will determine the competitiveness of regions and countries. So those who have access to green energy will really gain this competitive advantage over others. So this is this broad view. Of course, there are benefits to the environment, but we also look at it from the economy point of view. So having access to green energies becomes an ever more important element, also enabling attracting new investments. More and more companies keep developing technologies towards energy, but also a growing number of entities wishes to become greener. They start measuring their carbon footprint, and often they make their investment decisions or location decision based on whether there is access to green technologies in the region. So that's one thing. Another is that we really believe that we have a number of assets These assets make it easier for us to become part of the green transformation. I mentioned our coastal location and the potential of offshore wind farms. That's one thing. Another thing, which might come as a paradox, we are still energy net importer as a region. That has always been pointed as a weakness in some strategies, because we should strive at increasing the share of green energy, but it is also a certain asset because we are not burdened with coal-based energy. We are not burdened with the necessity to handle the issue of coal-reliant economy. So this strategy of green investments in areas is something that comes naturally in our region. And now straight to hydrogen. Well, we perceive hydrogen as a component of a greater whole, and we focus on it as energy storage in particular. Today, it comes as a key challenge also to increase the RES production, to store energy. So storing energy is the basic challenge. There is a growing number of entities, enterprises that invest in RES, particularly given the energy prices today. Their first choice is often photovoltaics. Wind energy has become somewhat complicated owing to the Polish regulations. So what comes as a challenge is energy storage. The traditional storage options do not guarantee this long-term storage perspective. On the one hand, we are trying to support in the new programming period something that we can call energy islands. They are investments in RES that support a mix that would ensure balancing at a local perspective. One of the limits is the quality of our infrastructure. And here, hydrogen offers itself that is perceived as a potential energy storage. On the one hand, it can release the potential for the production or for investments in RES. Of course, we also look at the issue from the point of view of investing in offshore wind farms. In particular, we are talking about those periods when there is surplus energy, so storing it in the form of hydrogen appears to be a natural solution. What other assets do we have as the Pomerian region? We've heard the mayor, we've heard the marshal, we've heard CEO Halbrecht, the head of the commercial chamber, and we've heard that this topic of hydrogen has not been new to the region. There are competencies in the companies locally. We've got Lotus Group now, until recently part of the Orlen Group. It has been dealing with hydrogen. It was not green hydrogen until recently, but still the expertise is there. So we've got a number of assets that make us natural candidates to become forerunners here. When talking about energy storage, we can think of another asset that we have here in the Pomeranian region, not so far away from here. We've got salt caverns. They could become naturally this place where we could store hydrogen. So that's yet another asset. Maybe so much for me now. Thank you very much. Now I would like to address Alessandro Polito.
Energy matters. The color of hydrogen also matters. The focus of the commissions is on green hydrogen, renewable hydrogen. And asking the question why is probably not very useful, because we all understand that we have to decarbonize the economy and the green hydrogen is the way. But the numbers that we've been hearing today, they are, I would say, very impressive. The scale of this challenge is very big. So can you maybe shed some light on how the Commission and DG Energy see the pathway towards achieving those very ambitious objectives? What should we be doing now? What should we be starting to do right now to achieve the 40 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity by 2030, the 10 million tons of production capacity, and the other targets that we are setting for ourselves?
So first of all, let me say that it's true that our primary target and our main focus is on renewable hydrogen, but this doesn't mean that other forms of hydrogen are neglected or will be forbidden somehow. Our hydrogen strategy itself recognizes that in a transitional period, low carbon hydrogen is needed. First of all, to rapidly reduce the emissions from existing hydrogen production, and secondly, to support the parallel and future uptake of renewable hydrogen. So low carbon hydrogen has also a role in the EU energy system. However, while low carbon hydrogen will have this transitional role, we believe that renewable hydrogen in the medium to long term is more in line with our climate and energy transition objectives, as it is fully carbon neutral, and also allows to integrate renewables into our energy system. In addition to this, we expect also that the cost of renewable hydrogen will go down, and renewable hydrogen will become cost competitive with low carbon hydrogen alternatives by 2030, if not even before, if we look at the current gas prices. And to be honest, under the current gas prices, renewable hydrogen is already cost competitive with blue hydrogen and possibly also with green hydrogen in some specific circumstances. And I was reading right yesterday a report that has not been published yet, but we had a preview of a report from the IEA on the status of hydrogen in the world, and prices of between 25 and 45 US dollars per million British thermal units that was observed in June 2022 and is lower than what we saw few months afterward in the gas market in Europe. Hydrogen production cost from unabated natural gas would be between around $8 per kilograms. Which is 3 times the level in 2021. And if we add on top the cost of carbon capture, for example, this will go this will become even higher. And renewable hydrogen at this cost is already cost competitive at the moment. It's already cost competitive in many parts of the world, or for example, even using offshore wind in Europe. Now, we all know that most likely and hopefully the price of natural gas will go down, but it depends how much it will go down. Renewable hydrogen can be cost competitive already quite soon. We know that the renewable hydrogen industry is a small one, and scale will be very important in reducing cost. Scale for production, scale also for electrolyzers manufacturing, but also scales of renewable to bring down the cost of electricity and especially renewable electricity. At the moment in Europe, we have only 140 megawatt of installed capacity, which is far away from the 40 gigawatts that we plan in our strategy, but I would say that the 40 gigawatt is already outdated. We moved to a 65 gigawatt objective in our REPowerEU scenario, which forecasts a higher production of hydrogen. But even if our current capacity is very small, things are moving quite fast and concrete projects will come online soon. If you look at the latest Hydrogen Council Insight report from September, Europe is home to over 30% of the proposed hydrogen investment globally for a value of 76 billion US dollars. There are nearly 314 projects proposal in total, and most of these will be commissioned, are planned to be commissioned before 2030. A big part is still in the planning stage, but 6 billion worth of projects are already to committed investments. And 15 new projects were proposed in the last, were announced in Europe in the last 6 months. So we are already moving forward quite fast. Now, how do we move to our 2030 targets? Well, first of all, we need to increase production and demand of hydrogen. And I discussed this already in my intervention before with our targets that we are setting in the EU legislation for renewable energy. Second, we need to step up and accelerate investments in the hydrogen value chain. I mentioned that we need 113 billion of additional investments for our REPowerEU objectives. Most of these will go to renewable, to the installation of additional renewable electricity capacity. We are already assessing important projects of common European interest and already announced that 2 of them were approved recently. One focused mostly on the production and the other one mostly on the use of hydrogen. And in total, they will mobilize something like around 25 billion euros from public and private funds. So it's a huge investment that we have there. We are topping up our coverage for hydrogen under the Horizon Europe investment program for 200 million euros. And we have a total funding of 3 billion euro for the Innovation Fund, which will also support electrification and hydrogen application industry and electrolyzers manufacturing. In terms of manufacturing electrolyzers, we are seeing plenty of developments in Europe, and we had last May, if I'm not mistaken, a commitment from the industry to scale up manufacturing capacity to 17.5 gigawatt in the EU by 2025, so very soon. So things are moving extremely fast. We need to make sure that the infrastructure are in place. This is also very important, both for internal transport of hydrogen, but also for the imports of the 10 million tons that we plan to import to the EU by 2030. We are working on the hydrogen and gas markets decarbonization package, on which negotiations in Parliament and Council are moving quite fast. And also we will map the preliminary needs for hydrogen infrastructure by March 2023 in the context of the 10E regulation on infrastructure for energy. What we also need is funding, and I already mentioned the European Hydrogen Bank, which will help de-risk hydrogen consumption and fill the gap between the cost of fossil-based hydrogen and renewable hydrogen. And finally, we're also working intensively with partner countries to create partnerships and cooperation, not only for the imports of hydrogen, but also for the development, for the deployment of new technologies, and to create a global market with clear rules and clear standards. We believe that all these actions taken all together will bring to a rapid ramp up of the industry, and in the long term, taking into account the important role of low carbon hydrogen in the short term, but we believe that in the long term, renewable hydrogen will be the best solution, not only for decarbonization, but also for the integration of the high amount of renewable energy and renewable electricity that we will need in Europe to decarbonize all the other sectors that can be already decarbonized through renewable electricity.
Thank you very much. Panie dyrektorze, zwracam
Director, I'm now addressing Grzegorz Pawelec from Hydrogen Europe, thanking the previous speaker, Alessandro. Now we are at the beginning of the path, but it proves that the green hydrogen may become market competitive in a relatively short term. A lot is going on. We have a number of investments that we've heard about. Poland is one of the biggest hydrogen producers of hydrogen in Europe, but we are talking mostly about the gray kind, fossil fuel based. I would like to ask you about the scale of the challenge for the Polish hydrogen industry. Should we expect something that we could define as transformation of the existing industry, or rather developing of it by adding this ecosystem of new players that will get involved? Good morning. It appears that both will have to happen parallelly. Looking at the entities that we have now as members of Hydrogen Europe, these are mostly big Polish entities, not only the big ones, but mostly. And we can see that there are projects that are being developed. It is mostly green hydrogen projects. We do not have enough time to mention them all, but we've heard about Hydrogen Eagle that Orlen is developing. We've heard about Neptune that is developed by the cluster, but there are many more. There is Lotos developing the projects for refinery purposes. We've got PGNiG that is trying to develop a project for storing. We've heard about salt caverns here so that we can balance the grid. We know that there will be an increasing share of offshore that we cannot really consume here in the north, so we will have to balance it. It can be critical if there is some nuclear power plant, then we need to have this flexibility margin, so it will be there and it keeps on developing. We have some local projects. Port of Gdynia is considering a hydrogen hub. We have Highway to Hell. This is a project that is related to railway connection from Gdańsk to the Hell Peninsula. Then we have another one concerning hydrogen ships. Then we have offshore hydrogen to be generated and then use it to bunker vessels that service offshore wind farms. So we've got gas system that is a member participating in the European hydrogen backbone, so building the network covering the entire Europe with the gas pipelines, enabling the transfer from the generation places. It will be cheaper, for example, in Southern Europe to the places where there will be a demand for hydrogen, like in the rural area in Germany or north of Poland. Polenergia has its own hydrogen strategy. The Holsa Group also carries out a number of hydrogen-related projects. So without getting into details concerning all these hydrogen projects, surely in terms of plans and what companies related to hydrogen and energy companies in Poland are planning to do, certainly we have nothing to be ashamed of. Because these plans are there, they are ambitious, and the companies do not live in vacuum. The Azoty Group knows that once the goal has been accepted to exchange half of grey hydrogen or hydrogen used for nitrogen production or nitrogen fertilizer production. it will have to be replaced in half with green hydrogen, then we are not talking about small-scale projects, but about gigawatts of electrolysis that will be needed by this single entity only, and they must be aware of it. Maybe these projects have not been officially announced yet because we don't know about the final shape of the legal provisions, but the projects are there waiting to be launched when needed. So in this sense, you can be optimistic. But on the other hand, certainly there is a number of things that come as barriers. And the fact that the projects are there does not necessarily mean that they will all turn into facts. They will not necessarily be implemented. One of the barriers can be something that has already been mentioned. So the financing options, we are not talking about small projects, but gigawatt powers. Then you need to have gigawatts of renewable energy. You need to have electrolyzers. When we talk about hydrogen for industry that you need in a constant cycle and it is based on RES, you need to have large-scale storage capacities. These are billion euros of investments, and there is hardly any company or entity that can really handle it single-handedly. So the funds from National Recovery Plan blocked now come as a hurdle to overcome, but without involving not only foreign but also national financing options, it will be difficult to implement the project. So there are certain mechanisms that already have envisaged the financing, but they will have to be released. Anyhow, there is a number of potential barriers that we could enumerate here. Poland is at an early stage of RES development. So certainly what we need now is a lot of RES for the power engineering sector itself. So whether we have those gigawatts of power needed for the Azoty Group, for example, to meet its own internal goals until 2030, because this is the time horizon that we are thinking of, and then it is not so certain, right? Even if in offshore we have this option, then, well, you need to talk about transporting it. You cannot use trucks. You need to have gas pipelines. Whether they will have been constructed by 2030, well, that's a hard question to answer. We might talk about an onshore electrolysis, but when we talk about the Puławy region, can we locally build 2.5 or 3 or 5, when you talk about photovoltaics, 5 gigawatts in the Puławy region? So there are numerous barriers. There are technological ones as well. This is something that has been said when we mentioned the availability of electrolyzers. 2-3 gigawatts per year is what we are talking about now, but we need to increase it tenfold, not by 2030, but it has to be done sooner, by 2025, for the plants to be able to start operating and produce the electrolyzers that we need by 2030. There is a Seskom company from the Pomeranian region that participated in the hydrogen partnership or agreement with electrolyzer producers that has been mentioned already. So we do have entities that are interested and active in this area. So summing up, certainly there are two elements that we can consider here. On the one hand, we see that big companies have plans, that's optimistic, but there is also a number of problems to be addressed. And maybe to add another problem, I will also add something that concerns the European Commission. You are surely aware of the talks that are being held and that concern temporal correlation, so the requirements for the area's production with hydrogen be correlated in the perspective of, say, 1 hour. So the European Parliament has decided to resign from a delegated act or to take over the competences of turning it into a directive, because the proposals from the Commission were too strict, and again they would constitute another barrier, mostly for the industry, because when we talk about steel industry or nitrogen industry, that is a priority industry in terms of hydrogen, they will require constant supplies of hydrogen, not when the wind is blowing or the sun is shining, but the entire year. So erecting barriers of very strict temporal correlation of hydrogen generation and RES generation would mean that in countries like Poland, it is not even known where hydrogen will be generated and what RES options will have developed. That would be an insurmountable barrier. So we need to work on it, and we don't have that much time. We need simple rules, and we need them to be clear, and we need them fast. Nobody's going to make an investment into 1.5 gigawatts of electrolysis that should be harnessed with developing new power options in RES without knowing what the rules of the game are, and that the rules are constant, transparent, and certain. So we are still, as Europe, on the lead, but we can slowly see that Americans are catching up. We can see the Inflation Reduction Act. We can see the rules being introduced. Nobody talks about the correlation that Europe is talking about. There are clear financial support rules for low emission hydrogen. So we already are getting signals from the companies that the stress, the emphasis is being shifted. For example, new electrolyzers are being ordered, not so much by European entities, but now, well, there are more and more entities from the other parts of the world that order electrolyzers. Okay, let's put a full stop here, because now I would like us to continue the topic, shedding somewhat more light on it. Paweł Łączkowski is a legal advisor who cooperates with entities, with enterprises that are interested in developing this business. And I would like to ask you about the barriers. We've mentioned technological and financial ones, and I would like to ask you about regulatory barriers, but not at the EU level. Here, of course, we make a note of what we've heard from Mr. Director, but I would like to learn what the industry expects in terms of the development of regulations for hydrogen here in Poland. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure that we can be here as Deloitte. It's such a prestigious event. Yesterday, we also were present at very inspirational panels. Thank you very much. It's been really inspiring. Your presence here in the room today and yesterday and via the internet proves that hydrogen is very much in focus. We get a number of questions concerning hydrogen and the regulatory environment. Well, it is very hard to really assess the regulations concerning hydrogen because there are no regulations as such. So now I told you what the general rule was, but let us dig somewhat deeper. If we make an overview, a review of legislation that regulates hydrogen in Poland, well, we would have to start with an act that was adopted on the 11th of August 2021. This is an act on the system of monitoring and controlling the quality of fuels, and it also amends some other acts, and it points at hydrogen as a fuel. So it is classified strictly as one of the fuels. Then we have executive acts that have not come into life, into force. That's just the news from 2 or 3 weeks ago. What appeared in the National Legislative Center, there are some bills, some projects, and I would like to pay attention to the one that is being notified now, so there is no signature of the minister yet. It points at the quality parameters of hydrogen, but let's bear in mind that this is just an executive act to the Fuel Act about the quality of fuels. So this is a huge challenge for the state and for you as engineers, as industry members, to see how these parameters relate to your businesses. I know that a lawyer at a conference packed with engineers, of course, raised some stereotypes. He's going to talk about problems. Well, I try to be a problem solver rather than a problem generator, but I would like to draw attention to some aspects. I do have some experience in power engineering, and from my point of view as a person with this expertise, those quality parameters certainly need to be evaluated, whether they can potentially become a barrier or no. It is an open question and too fresh a topic to be able to give an answer. Now I think that the engineers are the best people to answer that. Another one is about hydrogen stations. There is a bill that is relatively straightforward and that shows what such fuel stations would have to operate, what kind of rules they would have to follow. There are two further executive acts on quality testing of hydrogen. One concerns laboratories, the other of test methods. And I think that those four bills will impact the development of the industry. They are to come into force on the 1st of January 2023, but that's just one part, because starting from the end of last year, we've had hydrogen defined as an alternative fuel also in the Act on Electromobility and Alternative Fuels. So in that act, again, you have a definition of hydrogen fuel station that has a hydrogen fill-up distributor. And in this act about fuel quality and the one about electromobility, hydrogen is pointed at as the fuel that is used to generate electrical energy to drive engines. So it is seen as this driver that is supposed to move the engine, supplying it with electrical energy. Why am I mentioning all this? Because listening to your voices as engineers representing the industry, and I enjoy working with engineers very much, I can see this risk that the application of hydrogen is much broader. It is key what you've said about storing energy. It's also very interesting what we've heard from the European Union, namely the focus is on renewable hydrogen, right? But of course, we should not forget that we have other types of hydrogen. We heard about it yesterday a lot, so I'm not going to dwell upon it. But in the context of our power engineering, it will be important that we also think of hydrogen as the form of energy storage. And it is a acute challenge of whether hydrogen seen as a fuel will always fit into the development of hydrogen as an energy storage option. Let's bear in mind that ever since April 2021, storing of energy has been defined in energy law, and this Energy Act treats it as a separate kind of activity of a power engineering entity, the only exception being a warehouse connected to a source of renewable energy. The question is whether this storage of hydrogen that probably will be located closely to an RES will be considered in the same way after the law has changed, in the same way as the one that follows from the definition in the act that is enforced now. Well, we will have to wait to see what changes will be introduced. Anyhow, there is an act on promoting a hydrogen-related solution and hydrogen generation. That's one act, you surely confirmed it. And another one will be the one changing the Energy Act. We don't know the contents of these two texts, so the question is what the future holds. We can see that the legislator will probably foresee the functioning of a national operator of hydrogen system. And again, that raises doubts. Will we be following the dispersed model? So our Polish power engineering should go towards decentralized model, or will we keep on implementing this frantic large-scale policy with big sources, big recipients, and transfer over distribution and transfer networks over large distances? So there are many doubts here, but I think that maybe you can tell us what the assumptions are, because we don't know what the future holds in terms of legislation. What we do know, though, is that there is a bill on RES waiting to be approved, but what it defines is only the renewable hydrogen, and these changes are actually limited to the regulations on the guarantee of the place of origin. So the greatest challenge for the legislator now is harmonizing all these bills and acts in such a way that we arrive at a coherent system. The benchmark is rather narrow here. As you said, here in Europe, a number of companies have strategies. Not many have legal provisions, but the French, within their Code de l'Énergie, have a separate legislation on hydrogen generation, and the structure is that they have a definition of hydrogen, starting with it being an element, then about its origin and about its use. And there are two kinds of guarantees: le garantie de traçabilité, so the guarantee of identification, and a separate guarantee, la garantie de l'origine, so the guarantee of origin. And I think that's an interesting way to go. We could consider it and see whether it's applicable in Poland.
So I'd like to turn over the floor to Director Byliński. Something you've mentioned already, that's the Constitution for Hydrogen, that is regulations that I assume are being prepared, and which I presume will answer some of the issues, challenges that we've heard about. So please tell us about what is known about the solutions that the ministry is planning. Of course I will, but ad vocem to what we've just heard, if I could just add, because it seems the audience got a bit scared that the state is starting to regulate things and so on, but let me be a bit more precise here. The application of hydrogen is such that you can use it in various sectors, in transport and energy and industry. The legal system in Poland is that each sector has its own regulations in this area. So if we are talking about the Act on the Quality of Fuels, to which you referred to, the fact that hydrogen is fuel and what to do about it with energy, then the Act regulates quality only in the transport sector. Now, these regulations you've referred to, that's what they look like. Generally, there are 3 regulations dealing with the quality, research, testing, and so on. And of course, this can be a challenge for the industry in Poland, but I'd like to underline that issues connected with the quality of hydrogens are regulated on the European level. There are certain standards that deal with the quality of hydrogen, and through these solutions we implement these regulations. Of course, they're also subject to so-called technological notifications, that is, commissions in other states are able to check whether we are interfering, whether we're not going outside of our competences. And the decision, the resolution on hydrogen stations comes from the Act on Alternative Fuels, which is a certain, let's call it, constitution for the development of renewables, alternative fuels. And there we deal with the regulations dealing with hydrogen stations, also based on ISO standards, because we don't have yet Polish norms here. So all these technical regulations, principles were subject of discussion to the industry. Of course, they present a challenge, because we know that the way of testing hydrogen is a challenge, because every company tests this differently. So there's a question of accredited laboratories and so on. Now, something you referred to, that is energy law. Well, if we were to interpret that hydrogen is a gas fuel in accordance with the definition in the energy law, we could do that. However, in the applications where we want to use hydrogen, it would be better to explicitly express the definition of hydrogen. And here we should draw example from the market of natural gas, I suppose. And here a certain direction was given by the European Commission in that document that was issued, where the role of operators of hydro infrastructure was sketched out, the rules and regulations were set. So here we are in line with the concept of shaping the hydrogen market similar to gas market, taking into account the experience in the development of the natural gas market. So you're regulating the hydrogen market, which is not yet functioning. The regulations in natural gas took place in this way, that there were some issues connected with monopoly, with lack of shared infrastructure and so on. So in a similar way, we'll try to address hydrogen, but the problem with hydrogen is that on one hand it's gas, and on the other it's also energy storage. And the regulations for energy storage are completely different than for storing gas fuels. So hydrogen in a way brings these two fields together, and we have to reflect it in regulations, which is a challenge both on European level and on domestic level, because in accordance with the director of the energy markets, we have definition of energy storage. And generally, hydrogen storage fits the definition of energy storage because it's basically, it's being transmitted into a different energy carrier. It can be a battery, it can be hydrogen or gas fuel. So in our draft of the energy regulations, we'll try to take that into account. And of course, there is an issue connected with the statute on supporting hydrogen development. We are thinking about contracts similar to functioning in renewables. Currently, we're on the phase of starting analysis to get some recommendations. And finally, I'd like to say that if we are talking about energy consuming sectors, high energy consuming sectors, all the regulations connected with transport, storage are pretty well set. So for chemical industry, when we talk about hydrogen's innovation, chemical industry says, what sort of innovation? And we've had it for 50 years, we know it very well. So thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to go back to Director Pawelec. We've heard that we are facing a choice, whether the hydrogen revolution is going to be the work of large companies based on centralized model and developed infrastructure. It's going more of a decentralized model. We know that renewables in our energy system that we're building basically puts bet on many sources, smaller sources, which have various functions. My question is, how do you, as a representative of an organization of hydrogen companies, how do you see the optimum model of the development of the hydrogen sector? Centralization or decentralization? Both. There is no one optimum model for everyone. It's true that renewables, scattered non-renewables, have a big role to play. And of course, green hydrogen is going to be produced in this way to a degree too. And this is connected with the fact that transfer of hydrogen through pipelines, etc., can be done quite easily. However, local distributions through vehicles can be quite expensive, so it can be done or can't be done. So it depends on business cases, depending on the cost. So if the cost drops to 3 kilo per kilogram and we add 2 or 3 euro for transport, then it can be deadly for many companies. It also comes to the individual needs of municipalities or local production, using renewables, for example, for city buses or cogeneration or hydrogen valleys based in certain urban centers where you can basically give up on getting hydrogen from outside of the municipality. That has future. We can see some examples already in Europe. It was already mentioned that in Poland we have 6, I think, of such structures in Poland already. So we can see there's future here. Also the hydrogen hub in the port of Gdynia, which I've mentioned. So if we can produce the hydrogen locally there, then it can be used as fuel, for example, used by port equipment. However, it's not a solution for everyone. Definitely, especially if we are talking about industry or talking about a huge scale that is needed. Recently, we did an analysis of steel industry. Average European steel mill, if it had an electrolyzer connected to it, which would work constantly throughout the year, that would be 1.5 gigawatts of power. And if that were to be correlated with renewables, we're talking about 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 gigawatts of power per one steel mill. If we're talking about nitrogen plants, similar quantities. So this cannot be done simply based on renewables. We would need to have 100 or 200 sources of renewable hydrogen here. Also from the point of view of costs, if we are talking about large-scale production and the fact that we want to reach the level of about 1.5 euro per kilogram for green hydrogen, these are goals that can be achieved only if we consider large production scale. So this will has to be done in a centralized manner near offshore farms, or for example locally, for example in Spain, where there are conditions, cheap photovoltaics, where locally you can do these things. Heidi, for example, in the States, where for a steel mill locally they want to produce green hydrogen, but it needs to be large scale. So on the market, we see room for both large scale and smaller scale, centralized and both decentralized. I think it's a positive thing, which makes fuels such as gas and oil, which can be cheaply sent from the other end of the world to Europe, and they're still competitive. With hydrogen, it's more difficult. It's not impossible, but it's much more difficult. So there is more emphasis on local production here. There will be. Perhaps not exactly, in the place where it's produced, but for example, within Europe. So with, of course, this import from outside Europe, I mean, we will not go away from it. Hydrogen is not a way for total energy independence, but it will allow us to decrease energy dependence. Now, to wrap up, one more question connected to Paweł Łączkowski. Are you able to tell us what is the role of transformation by new players, companies which are not yet part of the hydrogen sector? They're not large companies yet, but they are looking at this business. They would like to get into it. What is their potential here? Or what sort of function they can play in building that sector based on renewable hydrogen mostly? Well, the interesting challenge here is that we are at the point where we can sort of arrange it from scratch, completely anew. So we can draw from mistakes that were done in the past using other solutions. We can take a look at how others have done it, and we don't follow certain tracks. You've pointed to certain sector character. It is a problem in Poland very often that acts can be contradictory or definitions can be different. There is, certain terms defined differently in different acts. We should have rational legislation. If, legislation defines something, that it should be consequent in using that definition. That's why I've pointed attention to the fact that when we start with legislation, we start from detail to general, it's difficult that if we define something in one act, it's going to be difficult to kind of move it into a wider definition later. I understand that this energy law is such definition which will include hydrogen as both fuel and other solutions, including storage, will be there, and then we'll have a way to refer to it. And this connects to your question, because any business considering new activity takes into account risks, and the regulatory risk is taken into account as well. So if we were to refer to a similar situation, a bit similar, let's think what was the situation in shale gas in Poland. So the sector was waiting for a long time for legal solutions. That was the main problem. Investors, clients were kind of stopping their projects because they wanted to find out what sort of legal conditions will be provided. So once the industry knows, when the sector knows the legislative solutions, then it can assess the risks. They can take a look at what the relations with the national hydrogen operator, for example, will be like, whether it will be similar to the relationship with energy distributors, or are these going to be solutions which are more similar to gas? Natural gas, when we have a strong single player and the rest of the sector is largely dependent on it. So the question is about how we set it up, because then this regulatory risk, we will be able to spread it out. We'll be able to see how to arrange this business. Of course, it's easier to interpret regulations when we come from general to detailed, when the fuel stems from a larger, more general definition. Thank you very much. We've gone through regulatory challenges facing Poland. At this point, moving towards the end, I'd like to ask two questions about how we are going to implement this renewable hydrogen in practice. A question to Joanna. Your company already does certain things here. We're not being theoretical here. There are concrete projects you're handling. Can you tell us more about details of your projects? What does it look like in practice when it comes to production of green hydrogen? Thank you for this question. Referring to what we have already talked about, if Poland is to make use of this hydrogen revolution that's taking place, then we need green electrons, that is renewables, at a scale that would allow for hydrogen production. And that is one of the main elements which shape later all the action strategies, measures, and so on. As far as international experience coming from what our company is already doing, this well refers very much to what you have mentioned. That is, we are looking for various solutions. A couple of projects which have one common element. They're all financed from public funds, usually from innovation funds of the European Commission. They bring together many partners. Sometimes these partnerships are non-obvious. For example, we can sometimes be partners of our competitors. And we look at a number of elements. So we're looking at production of hydrogen from marine offshore energy in a situation when electrolyzer is on land. It's an H2S project that's carried out close to Copenhagen. And the premise here is that the produced hydrogen, by the way, it's a pilot project at this point, which brings 2 wind turbines, 3.5 megawatts jointly. They connect those turbines with electrolyzer, which is being created on land and which is to produce 1,000 kilograms of hydrogen a day, which is going to provide fuel for public transport in Copenhagen. We have another project called Oyster. We're carrying it out with Siemens Gamesa. It's aimed at creating a turbine, an offshore turbine, part of which will be an electrolyzer. And here we have a completely different challenge. How to do it so that the technology can prove itself in marine conditions. And their part of the project is understanding how the hydrogen then would be transported to land. Another project, which is a partnership with a startup working on energy storage based on hydrogen. And very spectacular partnership, finally, which refers to what you mentioned, that is demand. We know that scalability of technologies and its development requires certain financial guarantees of demand. So Ørsted and Siemens signed a partnership in which Ørsted bought 500 offshore turbines. That was the biggest purchase in the history back then. It was more than all the installed turbines in the world then, I think. So we did it with the thought that we believe in this technology, we are going to develop it. And I see very similar mechanism, a partnership which Ørsted signed with Maersk this year. But Maersk decided to contract out a purchase of 300,000 tons of methanol, which is to be produced from green hydrogen for its 12 ethanol-powered ships. And this project is to be carried out until 2030. And that's as far as our international experience. Now, coming back to Poland, I'm very happy because our partner in Poland is ZAPAK, which is in this capital group, which you've mentioned before. And this company has one of the most ambitious strategies when it comes to the development of green hydrogen supply. It's a supply based on Polish technologies or developed in Poland. And in our view, this is one of the most ambitious projects in Poland. It's a company in partnership with which we've made 5 applications for the construction of offshore farms in Poland, and we're waiting for the solution here.
Thank you very much. And the last question of this panel goes to the Director Stanisław Szultka. We know, at least this is the image that we get from this conversation, that we are facing quite a challenge. Everybody seems to be looking at the Pomeranian region now as the region that has ambitious plans. You've been drafting very precise scenarios for the development of hydrogen economy, and I would like you to close this discussion with a reflection on whether, as a representative of the Marshal's office, you feel that you as a region can actually handle this burden of responsibility, because there is a lot of work for all of us to do. And in the light of what we have heard today on how the Pomeranian region should go about, what is the role that it can play in this endeavor? Well, I will try to answer briefly. Surely we know that we will not do much on our own. This is a challenge. By the way, many threads come together here that makes us cooperate within the group of numerous partners. I will just briefly tell you that from the central level, certain issues have to be at least regulated. So it's the thing of hydrogen being regulated. That's one thing that is a requirement for us to develop in all the other areas. Another issue is that of financing, particularly if we talk about some investments into transportation. These are really costly investments. So from the central point of view, there was Phoenix, there was the National Recovery Plan that's more technically is there, but it's not accessible yet. So without the resources and regulations, it will be hard to move on. But I will also tell you about 2 challenges that we defined for ourselves. Mr. Pawelec has mentioned a number of projects and investments that have been in the pipeline, some of them are being more advanced than others. The cities are testing transportation in the urban environment. Many projects are ongoing, but what we can see as a challenge is looking at this more holistic, multifaceted side of the endeavor. So for those bigger plans, it is necessary to coordinate the supply of sufficient amount of hydrogen with regulations, with time horizons for the projects. And we need to have resources, plus we need to coordinate the implementation, given that there will be multiple partners working together. The second challenge that we see is that we would like, thinking about the entire value chain, we would like the Pomeranian entities and investors that will be attracted by the region to generate as big an added value as possible in relation to the local content that we've said so much about. But since we are getting into the new technological area of the economy that is emerging, we wouldn't like to be consumers of the ready-made solutions, but also that we could, in a way, consume the larger piece of this pie. Given that the cluster of hydrogen technologies has been working for a while now, and it brings together many entities interested in developing that sector, and hopefully our cooperation with it will support us in implementing our goals, which of course is my wish not just to us, but to all of you in the room. Another word concerning what you've said, just a response. We can take a twofold approach to financing hydrogen. One is subsidies, another is some tax reliefs. And then this might be a modus operandi for the legislator, that they may also consider how to adjust taxation system so as it promotes the development of hydrogen. We have some experience already. The current taxation system also makes it possible for technologies to develop and obtain some donations. But this is a topic for a discussion during the break. Alessandro is with me wearing a blue suit. We would love to continue this discussion, but unfortunately our time is up, so I would encourage you to continue over the break. I will not even try to wrap up all the aspects we've touched upon. It's very good that we've got events like today's conference being organized, because there is a lot to discuss, and it's great that we have this opportunity. I'd like to thank the organizers for making it possible. I would like to thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Alessandro Polito, energy expert of the European Commission, has been our guest. Joanna Wis-Bielewicz, Grzegorz, Pawelec, Hydrogen Europe, Szymon, Byliński, the Ministry of Climate and the Environment, Stanisław, Szultka, Marshal's Office of the Pomorskie, Voivodeship, and Mr. Paweł Łączkowski, Deloitte Legal. Thank you very much for your participation. A round of applause. Thank you.
Jesteśmy największą metropolią w Polsce Północnej. Jesteśmy otwarci na to, co nowe. Jesteśmy świetnym miejscem do życia. Jesteśmy Trójmiastem i dlatego zawsze będziemy dbać bardziej.
Korki na wszystkich drogach dojazdowych do Trójmiasta już dawno przekroczyły akceptowalny poziom. Dlatego samorząd województwa pomorskiego uruchomił nową linię kolejową łączącą metropolię trójmiejską z Kaszubami. Dzięki podróży pociągiem tysiące osób może szybciej i wygodniej dojechać do pracy, szkoły lub na zakupy, a potem wrócić do domu. Nie trać czasu i pieniędzy w korkach. Podróżuj szybko i wygodnie koleją. Do pracy, do szkoły, na zakupy.